You have to put a lot of talent and effort in order to screw up that badly. I'm talking obviously about the Russian military operation in Ukraine, which we all know as the war in Ukraine or Russian invasion to Ukraine. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam. This is Dr. Sam's Health. Today I'm going to continue talking about the war in Ukraine as in my previous videos. As you know, I'm a medical doctor, and this channel is dedicated to health, to science of human health, nutrition, sports, exercise. But I'm Ukrainian. I spent almost 3 decades of my life in Ukraine before coming to Canada. And right now, with things happening in Ukraine, I cannot stay silent. And I decided to talk about this war to try to bring some sort of neutral, unbiased opinions to broader audience, because a lot of people who are like military consultants or reviewers, political reviewers, who exist in Russian or Ukrainian speaking part of the social media or media in general, they do not necessarily pass their opinions to the Anglophone audience, which is, I would say, at least 1 billion people. So that is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about the special military operation or war of Russians invasion. And specifically, I would like to talk about how it started, what were the goals of Russians, in my opinion, and how they screwed up, made in the most fantastic, ridiculous way possible. It will be a difficult conversation. Prior to starting, I will obviously make my regular disclaimers. First of all, I'm a medical doctor, I'm a psychiatrist, but I'm not going to talk about any kind of medical things here. I'm not going to give any kind of medical advice over YouTube. And the opinions that I express are solely mine. They have nothing to do with my regulatory bodies, my colleges, my universities. They don't even necessarily represent the opinions of Ukrainian official bodies, because I'm just a guy who was born in Ukraine, lived like close to 30 years of my life there, and now I live in Canada. But I still have friends there. I have my parents who had to evacuate from Ukraine uh, during the second week of this war. And I think that my international experience allows me to draw certain conclusions. And in my previous couple of videos, obviously, I spoke about the history of Ukraine, the ancient history, the pre-war history, and I think I laid down the foundation for a proper understanding of what is happening in Ukraine and what exactly happened in the first couple of weeks of this conflict. So, obviously, as we are going to talk about the conflict, the normal story would be I should talk about the antecedents, which we kind of covered in the first couple of videos on this topic. We should talk about the goals, but that's a little bit of an issue here, because, as I said, I believe that Russians started this operation with a certain set of goals. They actually declared certain goals, and which, quite frankly, were total BS. But they also had certain goals, the real ones, and they failed to achieve them. Actually, I would say that to say they screwed up is a huge understatement. It literally takes a lot of talent and effort to fail at this level. Nevertheless, I think I will make a special video about the goals of Russians and what they were declaring and how much of a BS it is. But I think it would be safe to say that despite all these changes of declarations and actual goals during this last 116 days or so of this war, I think that it is clear that the main overarching goal is to kind of pull Ukraine back into the Russian sphere of influence. They use this term Ruski Mir, which stands for like Russian world. They believe that they live in certain universe, post-Soviet Union universe. And in my opinion, Putin and his regime, they really want to recreate Soviet Union, and certain countries like Belarus, for example, they tend to stick to Russia to a certain extent. And countries like Ukraine, they became independent, and during the 31 years of independence, Ukraine was gradually steering away, drifting away from Russia. As I said in my previous videos, by the way, if you haven't watched them, please watch them. I go into a lot of details about Ukrainian history. Ukraine, and pretty much the vast majority of Ukrainians, it doesn't really matter whether they were speaking Russian or Ukrainian, they really wanted to live normal lives. They wanted to have transparent elections, they wanted to have more or less democratic society, they wanted to adhere and stick to European values, the Western values, to build good economy, to create their businesses. And they were gradually moving away from Russia. And Russia, over the course of the past 31 years, or at least the last 20 years, or 20 plus years since Putin became president of Russia, or dictator of Russia, if you will, he was trying to use all means available to him, which is a lot, to pull Ukraine back. We had this marionette puppet President Yanukovych, who was clearly the protege of Putin and Putin's regime. We had multiple politicians and political parties that were influenced and sponsored by Russian regime. We had Crimea that was taken away from us. We had separatist movements in Donbass where Russians actually used their military power to fight off Ukrainian Armed Forces and this militia or national volunteers who were fighting for Ukraine. There's a lot of things that were happening, and at certain point, specifically this year in February 24th, 2022, Russia made a huge advance to do a number of things to Ukraine, to Ukrainian government, in order to pull it back. So they have declared a number of goals, as I said, that they wanted to denazify Ukraine, which is BS. They wanted to demilitarize Ukraine because they were stating that, the West is arming Ukraine and Ukraine is potentially going to attack Russia, which is also ridiculous. You can even look at what's happening right now, and Ukraine is like 20 times smaller than Russia. Who would ever try to attack Russia? It's just unbelievable. Nobody would. I don't think that United States, the prototypical arch enemy of Russia, would ever try to attack Russia. The West would never attack Russia. It doesn't make any sense. But they made all these declarations, and their primary goal was to destroy the military, obviously, or incapacitate the military, to capture or incapacitate the government, overthrow it, and to establish or install their own another set of puppets that they would be completely under their control or under their influence. There was also some sort of a secondary goal that I think persists throughout the whole conflict or war. Once again, sorry for using the word conflict. It is a war. This secondary goal was to create the land corridor between continental Russia and Crimea, as well as, to advance this corridor to something that we would call Pridnestrovia or Pridnestria, and in English language it would be called Transnistria. So that is another sphere of Russian interest and influence, and they wanted to connect all these parts, at least Russia and Crimea, because this bridge that they have built is nothing in comparison to the needs of Crimea. As I said in my previous videos, again, watch them, please. I was talking about the fact that it's a peninsula. It's very hard to survive on peninsula without supplies from the mainland. Nevertheless, that was their goal. And my understanding that they plan to achieve this goal within several days. They actually were talking about it. All their propagandists were saying that, just like raise an eyebrow and we'll be in Kiev in 3 days. And if we want, we can be in Warsaw, Berlin in 2 weeks. Well, it looks like they were hoping to or planning to for this operation to last just several days. And you will see why. And that was actually a huge strategic mistake. as well as there are quite a few other mistakes. So why do they why do they think that they could actually do something like this to Ukraine or with Ukraine? First of all, I think that they started to believe their own propaganda. It's a totalitarian regime. They have very strong propagandists, Solovyov, Skabeyeva, all this BS, terrible shows. I cannot actually watch their political shows. It's just a circus. People yelling, screaming. There is only one opinion available there. And they all believe that Russia is great. Russia is defending Russian-speaking people. In Ukraine, there are Nazis, drug addicts, and I'm quoting them, actually. They are talking about Ukraine being filled, the Ukrainian government being Nazis and drug addicts, and Ukrainians are crazy and they're going to attack Russia if we don't do something with that. And they thought and truly believed their own propaganda that Ukraine is weak, full of drug addicts, Nazis, and Russia is great. And the most modern history of the past 3.5 months shows that Russia is not as strong as everybody thought, not even as strong as they thought. So that was the first thing they believed. Second, again, it's a totalitarian regime. It's not only propaganda, there is also multiple services, or yeah, we can call them services or branches of the military intelligence, political advisors, they're advising to Putin. And when they're talking to him, I can easily see how they are scared to tell him the truth, or to express some opinions that are different from the major narrative. And he was likely misled. And actually, I will make one point. I have a couple of very pro-Russian friends, and it's sometimes very difficult talking to them because they believe that Putin and his Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, they're amazing diplomats, they're amazing strategists. I think they're idiots, and actually it shows how stupid they are, because in my opinion, for somebody who's coming from KGB, you can always gather information. That's their job of the intelligence people. They have to be intelligent. They have to be able to cross-reference multiple sources of information and to have clear picture of what kind of army you have, what kind of political situation Ukraine has, Russia has, the world has, and based on that you act. It looks like he started believing their own BS, and that was one of the antecedents of this war. And also there was a series of conflicts that they had, unfortunately, that pretty much the world let them slide with all this stuff. No, there was no real punishment. So Chechnya, Ossetia and Georgia, Transnistria, Syria, Afghanistan, and of course, Crimea. Crimea is a special point. They have taken Crimea without any kind of major violence. They just invaded. And I specifically stress it so much because they did invade Crimea and annexed it very fast, within just like a day or two. But the situation was there very, very different. There was no resistance, in part because actually for Ukrainians to think about fighting Russian troops is ridiculous, because we were brothers until recently. Then there was no real government, and most importantly, then Russians were already located there. They had naval base, their fleet, and it was a relatively short, easy job for them just to approach Ukrainian military personnel there and just say, guys, there's like 300 of you here, there's 10,000 of us there. We can annihilate you within several minutes, but we don't want to do it. So please just surrender. Your government doesn't know what it is doing. And Crimea was very pro-Russian. Again, it is a cradle of Russian Navy. There are lots of people who were not happy with Ukraine. And I know, again, that lots of people will be unhappy with me saying this, but that is the reality that I saw with my own eyes and I believe in. So that's how they have captured and annexed Crimea very fast, without any violence. And they were hoping that they would be able to do exactly the same thing here. They would invade Ukraine, as they did on February 24th, 2022. They invaded from multiple directions, hoping for a fast victory. One important thing I would like to say that with all these previous conflicts, there were no real repercussions. There were some sanctions, but they were easily circumvented, and essentially the world pretty much did this thing. They were looking through their, kind of closing their eyes and pretending that Russians did something bad, but it's not that bad. We would never accept the annexion of Crimea, but at the same time, we want to trade with Russia. We want natural gas. We want oil. We want lots of natural resources. Russia has nukes. Russia has a very strong military, and in general, we don't want to continue this kind of conflict. So this special military operation, which, by the way, in Russia they still cannot call war. There were some journalists that lost their job and potentially their freedom for just using the word war once. So they invaded, and they were hoping for a blitzkrieg, for a very soft, smooth operation. Just within several days, they would capture everything and achieve their goals. The problem is that they have severely underestimated Ukrainian. They have severely overestimated their own military capacity. They have completely misunderstood the political landscape in two countries. And in my opinion, the main mistake that they have made was attacking first. So, as I said, in Crimea, the situation was very different. Ukrainian Navy and Ukrainian military personnel, they were not ready to shoot or to fight Russians. And Russians approached them essentially with a smile. So yes, we got all this military force, but all we want from you is just surrender. And they didn't shoot anybody. There was no actual military action. Here, Putin declared special military operation started, and within several minutes there were rockets and missiles flying to multiple locations in Ukraine. It was a full-scale invasion from multiple directions. They have destroyed multiple military infrastructure objects. They have destroyed multiple civilian objects, by the way. They have destroyed, even like, if I take a look at just my hometown, so home city of Kharkiv, we had a tractor factory, which is a tank factory. We had fantastic research institutions that were studying nuclear power, physics, superconductors. We had a number of factories, universities, and all these things were attacked. And I know for sure that from literally day 1, 2, 3, there were a number of like multiplexes that were heavily shelled by Russians. So they have attacked multiple objects, and there were immediate losses of military personnel and civilian lives in the first hours of this invasion. And in this situation, when you are attacking at 4 or 5 a.m. without declaring a war, you are killing essentially our brothers and sisters. No military person would not resist. Actually, Russians have made the impossible. They have united Ukrainians. I told in my previous videos that Ukrainians are quite divided. There are like Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking. We have multiple political parties who got lots of opinions here and there. There were actually people who believed that Russians should take over. Unfortunately, I know some of these people, and some of them unfortunately still believe that it was a good idea. God bless them. But when this thing happened, every single Ukrainian, or a vast majority of them, they were ready to pick up arms. And actually, there were certain preparations for this war made since 2014. President Poroshenko and President Zelensky, they were preparing Ukrainians for that. The army was strengthened. There were a number of defensive structures created. There were a number of special weapons and tactics employed and then used in the first days of the war. So Ukrainians were much better prepared. Russians did a major faux pas there by attacking Ukraine right away instead of at least trying to negotiate with these troops. And everybody who could hold a firearm and everybody who could get a firearm, they started fighting. And they have slowed down Russians immediately. And within several days, they actually reached Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and they were close quarter battles, effectively, or like city quarters battles inside of Kiev, inside of Kharkiv. Actually, if you remember, there was this very famous clip with Russian armored vehicle driving over like some pensioner's car with the pensioner inside of it. That was another atrocity, and they have done everything for Ukrainians to unite again against them. So that was the situation the first several days of war, and immediately what happened, Russians have lost the element of wasted the element of surprise. They did attack number of objects, but they were not particularly efficient with that. They were talking about having destroyed Russian Air Force, which is Ukrainian Air Force, and that was not the case. They claimed they have destroyed all military, which is not the case, and everybody fought them off, slowed them down, destroyed multiple vehicles, actually with like hundreds of tanks, hundreds if not thousands of all kinds of other military vehicles, planes, helicopters, rockets, drones, everything you can name, you name it, it was destroyed by Ukrainians in the first several days of this conflict. Actually, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think that within the first couple of weeks of this war, Russians have lost more military personnel than they have lost over the course of whole Afghanistan war that they participated in. And that's quite telling. So they have these troops, they're losing multiple tens of thousands of military personnel, they're killing tens of thousands of Ukrainian military personnel, tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians, millions of Ukrainians have been evacuated, relocated inside of the country, fled the country, lost their homes, and that pretty much secured the fact that Ukrainians will fight to the end. And on the other side, they have lost all this personnel, all this military equipment, they have lost the momentum, and they have lost their morale. And their troops, they just hope that it will be like one of these Russian blitzkriegs when they just invade and everybody surrenders. And they have met such a fierce resistance that they realize that, first of all, they don't know how to fight, they don't have proper strategies, their equipment sucks, and their army is so corrupt that they have lost a lot of they realize that they cannot resupply, and ultimately they have lost in another very important element of modern warfare: logistics. So Russians were never good with logistics. You actually need proper market economy to have good logistics, but Russians followed their traditions of the past, I don't know, century, and they sucked in logistics. And maybe you remember this military convoy, like 40-mile convoy close to Kiev, and it was not moving. And people were thinking, why aren't they moving? The answer was very simple. They ran out of fuel and supplies. So actually, it shows that lots of these Russian soldiers, they didn't have enough food. They had to literally steal it from, or like marauder it from Ukrainian civilians. They had to rob food stores. They ran out of gas. They ran out of diesel fuel. And all of that pretty much forced them to retreat within several weeks because they were not able to do whatever they were going to achieve. And that's, in my books, is the major screw up. And I think it's a runner-up for the major military screw up of the century, at least so far. So that's my opinion and my reflection of what has happened in the first couple of weeks of this war. And I would like to summarize. Russians hope for very quick military operation. That's why they actually called it military operation instead of the war. They expected that Ukrainians will just surrender and they will not have to fight. Turned out that Ukrainians are stubborn and skilled enough to kick their asses, and they have done so despite against all odds effectively. And they've lost momentum. They have lost a lot of troops, a lot of vehicles, a lot of ammunition, and they created actually something I haven't spoken yet about. They have created a situation when, unlike all these previous conflicts or wars, they have put themselves in a situation when they're still fighting this illegitimate war. And the Europe cannot close their eyes. The West in general cannot tell them that, guys, it was very bad, but bad Putin, bad Russians, uh, we'll introduce some sanctions, but from now on, please don't do it again. No, right now and then, the situation turned out to be absolutely different. There was a situation when Russians were actively shelling civilians in the middle, not in the middle, but in Europe in 21st century, where people dying, people have been raped, murdered, tortured, and there was no actual reason for this war to begin with. And it was absolutely ridiculous atrocity. And the whole world couldn't just sit there and pretend that nothing has happened. So Europe had to say something. The United States had to say something. They had to act. They had to support somebody in this situation. And the only country and people that they could support were Ukrainians. So if essentially Russians did everything to screw up this military operation and to pretty much antagonize the whole West, whole Western civilization, the whole Western world. Now it is a war between Russia and NATO, as Russians claim, or between a proxy war between the West and the East, or the Russia. Anyhow, that's my take on this. Obviously, we would like to talk about several other things, and I will definitely do it in my several following videos. I would like to talk about Putin in general, his mental status. I would like to talk about what's going to happen next. I would like to talk about the losses of Russia, because I believe that Russia has lost already on so many levels, and a couple of other things. Maybe about the initial goals of Russia and how much they do not make sense. So that was it for today. I really, really appreciate you watching. I would really appreciate you hitting the like button, leaving any kind of comments. Make sure that it's long enough. I want the YouTube algorithm to keep this video up. I want more people to watch these videos, and maybe you can ask questions, leave comments. All these things, they help. And if you don't mind, please spread this video over your social media. Just share it, leave links, ask questions. Again, I'll be happy to talk about pretty much everything I'm comfortable talking about. For example, I'm not sure I can be a good person to talk about the conflict in Donbass. I don't know that well enough. I didn't live in Donbass. It's hard for me to talk about whether, say, Azov battalion are Nazis or not. I find this term to begin with to be very vague, and also I just don't have enough information. I still have my opinion on certain things, or lots of questions myself, but I don't think I would be comfortable talking about it just because I'm not that familiar with that part of this war. But I'll be happy to answer your questions, to, not to debate, but, just to have a conversation online via YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, you name it. But please share this video. Help me to reach broader audiences. And as always, subscribe, check out my website, drsamshealth.com. And I just hope that this war will be over sooner than later, and we'll be able to return to normal life. Ukrainians will be able to rebuild their country, I will be able to get back to nutrition and exercise and health in general. Again, thank you for watching. See you soon.